Cybernauts, greetings. Welcome, citizens of the Intergalactic Computer Network. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we travel to a land far distant in time and space, a land populated with strange people, with strange ideas, with even stranger names. This, the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, the hoi polloi get the tulip seats. The captain, well, he got the special chair. He got the big chair, commensurate with his intelligence and his skill, obviously. I missed the old original series. This is the control room of a project, a system designed to bring an entire nation, an entire society under the central control of an integrated, custom-built, custom-designed computer system. The captains of this society also had their chairs. Unlike Kirk's, they had a cigarette ashtray and a drinks holder. They had buttons that they could push, and as they pushed the buttons, they called up displays on screens that would show them detailed information about every aspect of the economy, sorry, wrong slide, and the society over which they presided, production of raw materials and distribution of commodities. And one of these screens was of particular interest to them. This was the screen that showed the output from the algedonic system. The algedonic system, a portmanteau of the Greek for pleasure and pain. And on this system that was connected across, or supposed to be connected across the television and radio network of this entire blessed realm, people would indicate from the comfort of their own homes the level of their happiness or otherwise their pain or pleasure, and the purpose of so indicating was to enable the central computerized control system to manage dissent, disorder and rebellion out of the system. This was to be a society controlled by computers. Utopia, dystopia, you decide. Fantasy? Absolutely not. This was Project Cyber Sin or Cyber Cinco. It had a communication system, it had an operations room, it had a software architecture, it had the algedonic system, and it was created at the behest of this man, Salvador Allende, elected 1970, rather forcibly and dramatically unelected a few years later. This was intended to be a system in which computers would act as the friends, the servant of humanity in the hands of the enlightened rulers of this blessed realm. And clearly the responses to this were appropriately politicized. And the responses of this played to a narrative. I think it's stretching the point to claim that they established the narrative, but they played to the narrative, that the idea of a computer-controlling society was intrinsically evil, intrinsically bad. And so, in the period after the fall of the regime and in the period after the deconstruction of Project Cybersin, you see a shift in popular culture. Logan's Run the Computer is the criminal. By 1977, an episode of The New Avengers has Purdy taken captive by a cybernetic, computer-controlled building, rescued, of course, by the heroic Steed. So Cybersin was the creation of this man, Stafford Beer. You may never have heard of Stafford Beer, but if you've ever had the joy and the pleasure of encountering a management consultant, you've almost certainly heard of his ideas. So this, his most famous work, published 72, still available on Amazon. He finds his way to Chile via Sheffield, where he created and established and operated an operational research department of British Steel in the gloriously titled Cyborg House. So, what's this guy in Sheffield doing talking about cyber? Cyber's ours. We know what cyber is. It's a lazy sobriquet that management and marketing people stretch to when they want to get a budget approved, shortly to be replaced by artificial intelligence and machine learning, because if you stick that on it, you're bound to get the money because nobody dares say no. Or it's a fictive construct, a la Gibson, it's the Matrix, it's a domain of warfare. Well, yes and no, but mostly no. Meet Uncle Norbert Wiener. 1948, Wiener wrote a book. He's an academic, he's a mathematician, he's polymath. He knew Stafford Beer. He called Stafford Beer the father of management cybernetics because Wiener's book was called Cybernetics. At the time he wrote the book, Wiener was a participant in a series of conferences organized by the Macy Foundation in upstate New York. After the publication of the book in 1948, the conferences changed their name to the Macy Conferences on Cybernetics. This book goes bananas, unexpectedly so. It's wretchedly printed, it has a mystifying title, and yet it is held to be as significant as any of the works of Galileo or Rousseau. This is a book that you cannot possibly have avoided reading if you are in any way, shape or form to lay claim to being an educated, sentient, sapient human being in the middle of the 20th century. And of course it's a book that everybody in this room has read because it's the book from which we get our word cyber. Not only our word cyber, the reality of the cyber construct that we inhabit. This thing sells. It creates what's called the cybernetic explosion. There's even an art exhibition. And yes, cybernetics is used by Gibson to connote the fictive collective hallucination, but he's also on record as acknowledging his debt to Norbert Wiener. Wiener names this book, names the set of ideas that he authors in this book, deliberately and consciously, drawing on the traditions of classical antiquity, drawing on this notion of an approach to systems, to the management and to the construction and to the conceptualization of systems, which has about it a black box. So as far as Wiener and his conceptualization of cybernetics is concerned, when it comes to achieving the desired result of systems, you monitor behavior. You're really not that terribly concerned of what the system itself is composed of. He's interested in systems, all kinds of systems, not reductive notions of control systems for robots, but all kinds of systems, particularly and explicitly non-deterministic systems. He's interested in dissolving, obliterating the boundaries and the distinctions between the biological and non-biological components of the system. For Wiener, it doesn't matter. They're functionally equivalent. The human element is just a machine. The fact that it's squidgy and wet and bleeds when you cut it is just an accident of the way that the molecules and the atoms are assembled. It is irrelevant. All systems, including the social, so therefore the city itself, is simply a machine for living. He publishes 2 further books, one in which he explicitly extends the ideas of cybernetics to human society, and then the second in which he starts to get into the realm of machines that think, machines that learn, machines that reproduce themselves, machines which start to exhibit a functional indistinguishability from those entities that we call alive. Wiener understands something phenomenally and profoundly important about our relationship to technology, which is, simply put, like it or lump it, it's existential. We absolutely, fundamentally rely upon our technology for our very existence. And as a consequence of our relationship to and with technology, we modify our environment in a way that no other species on the face of the planet does, to the extent that we need to modify ourselves. And it's not unique. 10,500 years ago, we stopped chasing our food over the edge of cliffs, we started to plant crops, we generated a calorific surplus, and we never turned back. Similarly, the invention of writing. Similarly, the capacity to generate and transmit electricity. Similarly, the internal combustion engine. We humans individually are puny, no contest, the raptor wins each and every time, and yet we're the apex species. How so? We're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, and we might not even be the smartest for all we know, but we are the apex species because of our capacity, our imperative to society. And in the discharge, the exercise of this imperative and this capacity, our brain and our mind is critical. The hardware and the software. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we get into the realm of Descartes and the Cartesian duality and the separability or otherwise of the brain and mind, because that's the path we set ourselves on. The problem with thinking about thinking is that we use the thing that we're thinking about to do the thinking about the thing that we're thinking about, I think. Yes, these machines augmented and supplemented human muscle. These machines augment and supplement not merely the brain, but the mind. And they need to, and we need them too. Once upon a time, you could run a very impressive empire with a metropole, a population the size of 1 million. By 1921, you could still run an incredibly impressive empire in terms of scope and size. I make no moral judgments, with a metropole of relatively modest size. And then this happens. We start to gather together into megacities. And we're going to carry on doing it. And as we do so, we're going to generate incredibly, phenomenally sophisticated, complex, non-linear, non-deterministic systems in and through which the flow of information is critical. Therefore, we are going to have to do this. Not an option. It's not a choice, any more than the invention of writing or the invention of the wheel was itself a choice, because this is killing us. This has to stop. This is crippling societies, blighting lives. There is no tenable way on the face of this or any other planet we can continue to do this. And the weakest link in that system is the human. Out it needs to go. We're going to do this because we are going to get to the point where we do not want to send our mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, daughters, sons into the battle space to get shot to pieces simply to deliver whatever it is that thing is delivering. Whether or not we want to send humans into the battle space at all is a question which is increasingly becoming far from abstract. Who would want an interconnected fridge? Who would want a kettle that's connected to the internet and can remit information about real-time electricity consumption back to a micro-distribution, a micro-generation grid, when the alternative is one of these nice, big, industrial-age, central generation command and control grids? You're working really well, aren't they? We're doing really well with those. We do not live in constant fear of brown or blackouts as a consequence of these really technical term crappy systems. Yes, we do want a system in which we take something out of the fridge, pint of milk, it blips the online grocery, and yes, the micro drone delivers because we want to move around our cities. And to put it crudely, your poo is going to become terribly, terribly important. Increasingly aging populations, increasing patterns of comorbidity. We cannot build enough hospitals or recruit enough medical staff. So yes, the real-time analysis of your poo is going to become vital, as is the capacity for predictive analytics, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. At the moment, we're looking at autonomic, cybernetic augmentation of humans for the autonomic administration of bioremediation in combat. In other words, giving soldiers drugs to make them go faster or feel pain less. We're going to extend that into the civil society realm. You are going to become part of the Internet of Things. Forget the Internet of Things. It's going to be the Internet of Humans, the seamless, indivisible, symbiotic interconnection between humans, machines of other forms, the planet, and the noosphere. Of course, Elon Musk is on the outer fringes of sanity. Of course, his idea of a human-machine symbiosis that will equip and augment humans to the point where we can hope in some way, shape or form, in his terms, to survive the singularity, is completely esoteric and has never been entertained by any respectable academic. So here's Uncle Norbert, who says very explicitly in the middle of the 20th century, look, he says, when I speak about machines, don't get me wrong, I don't mean the metal, I mean you. I mean all machines, and I mean their intercombination into systems, and if it's a system element, it's a system element irrespective of how the atoms are comprised. Of course, Musk is on the fringe. The survival of man, quote, depends on the early invention of an ultra-intelligent machine. An emanation of the mind of this man, Jack Good. Bit of a lad, Jack. This was his number plate whilst he was teaching at Virginia Tech in the United States of America. Splendid. Oh, and he was also one of Kubrick's scientific advisors on the set of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Turing first encountered Good when Good was found asleep by him on the floor of Hut 8. They patched up their differences, got on terribly well, and went on to do some interesting things with Bayesian probabilistic analysis, which I'm told by my mathematician friends is really rather important when it comes to this machine learning-y stuff that we're really quite interested in. Oh, and he also made some of the cryptological foundations for asymmetric encryption, and he was a member of the Ratio Club, the diaspora of which populated English intellectual and public and civil service life for the years after the early 1950s. And he published the paper from which this quote is taken in a highly respectable academic journal, in which he kind of disabuses us of our notion that we may have authored the ideas of neural networks. He understood what Wiener understood, which is that when we talk of the cybernetics that Wiener conceived of, we speak of a set of ideas which are about systems of all forms and all sorts, but explicitly and specifically social systems and the realm of information and information systems within social systems, and the intercombination of the two, the seamless, indivisible intercombination between the two. So in The Human Use of Human Beings, Venus says, it is the thesis of this book that society can only be understood through a study of the messages and communication facilities which belong to it, and that in the future development of these messages and communications facilities, messages between man and machines, between machines and man, and between machine and machine are destined to play an ever-increasing part. The next time somebody stands up in a presentation and says, who could possibly ever have imagined the internet? Who could possibly ever have imagined the Internet of Things? Gosh, there's no way we could have predicted it. They're wrong. We could and should, because it's there in the record. Vina had a mate, Licklider, JCR Licklider, a psychiatrist by training, also a participant in the Macy conferences. In 1965, Licklider imagined a library of the future, not a building of bricks and mortar, but an interconnected system of computers that would handle what he called transportable information divorced from its bearer, information that could combine and form ephemeral, contingent, associative links within the system that would be instantiated, given physical form by this thing that Licklider called the Intergalactic Computer Network. And he wrote a memo, and he convened a group of United States Department of Defense people around the idea of the Intergalactic Computer Network. I want to write memos like this. I want to be part of committees called the Intergalactic Computer Network Committee. And they built the Computer Network, although it wasn't very intergalactic-y in 1969. It was, technical term, a bit crap. But then it got better, and then it got better, and then it got better. And of course, it's ARPANET, which of course means it's the foundation of the internet. Welcome back to the Intergalactic Computer Network, ladies and gentlemen. You are inhabitants of Licklider's greatest creation. Of course, the internet simply arose as Minerva by accident. Vina urges us to make conscious choices about how we wish to see the relationships between humans and machines, machines and machines, machines and humans across and within society going. Of course, we've outgrown the superstition of our Victorian forebears. We don't believe, as they did, that to travel faster than 40 miles an hour on a train would shake you to pieces. We don't believe that the democratization of information is going to corrupt the youth and degrade and rot the brains of those who watch YouTube and do whatever it is that they do. We don't believe that you have to put a human with a flag in front of a motor car because the internal combustion engine will cause cows to spontaneously abort. We don't believe that, for instance, switching on the Large Hadron Collider will instantly cause the universe to collapse. We don't believe that any of this stuff has any intrinsic or innate evil about it. It's reassuring to know, ladies and gentlemen, that after several hundred years of the Enlightenment, then we are still able to spot a witch and witchcraft when we see it. This reassures me enormously, our rational response. You have one of these about your person, bring your own disaster, absolute nightmare of a construct. This, don't make me laugh. We're security experts. Who could possibly want this as the barrier to their most prized and treasured possessions? Look at this. The worst of these you can open with a screwdriver, which of course you can't do with your standard Yale lock, so that's okay. And then the ones that are good, well, all you need is a PhD in computer science, a Raspberry Pi, presumably the power source, a $100 Ubertooth sniffing device, I got one of those about my person, a $50 high-gain antenna, blah, 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 all of which about your person, and however long it is you need to stand there on the street getting in through the front door. Thankfully, the Yale lock that you currently protect your house with is much more resilient to a brute force attack than any of that. It's not like you can go onto the internet and get a lockpick for a tenner that will break into your house, because that would really be in trouble. Even worse, if you couldn't be bothered, you just went onto the internet and got one for 20 quid, which is fully automated, but it's okay because it says it's for locksmiths only, so that's fine. I feel deeply reassured and safe. No, give me one of those any single day, rather than bog standard, off-the-shelf, out-of-the-box encryption that can withstand brute force attack for longer than the sun is expected to live. If all the computers went on the blink, the country would be paralyzed. Aeroplanes would fall out the sky. Our defenses would collapse. The telephone system would be completely inoperable. We think we spotted this around the year 2000. We think we spotted this around the Internet of Things or the Internet or ransomware attacks. This will give you something of a clue as to when this article was actually written, just out of its teens. Blah, blah, blah. The computer is driving social change. This, ladies and gentlemen, was written in 1965. We really have been living on borrowed time. Oh, and in 1969, we make the first film I can find, the first reference in popular culture to the use of a computer system to execute a crime. Remember, in this film, the criminals hack into the traffic control system in an Italian city, use that to change the traffic light sequence, and use that to expedite their escape. Cybernetics. The creation of the ultra-intelligent machine, big data, it is almost certainly a matter of life and death. Ours. Thank you. Stupidly, I've left time for questions. Or stunned silence, whichever you prefer. Crikey. Hang on. There's what? Right. The central thing I think we have to focus on at this juncture is the recovery of the sense of human agency. So we've allowed a situation to arise in which we have ahistoricized the realm that we operate in. We have completely lost sight of the historical, empirical roots of where we've come from. We've completely lost sight of the philosophical, and I mean literally philosophical dimensions of the construct that we are charged with the education about, the management of, the construction of, and so on and so forth. We have neglected the sense of our own moral imperative in the way in which this stuff is deployed, designed, operated. We've allowed this myth to develop that STEM is the dominant discourse, should be the dominant discourse, should be the source of authority, that you can only understand or have voice in these systems if you are from a STEM background. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. When we arrive at a point in time where this technology is presenting us with the very real prospect of being able to field machines of metal and plastic and other bits in a theatre of war that can execute lethal effect without direct human agency, I submit we're in the realm of a moral and philosophical inquiry. When we talk about driverless autonomous vehicles and we start to talk about the development or the expression of the trolley car problem, we're in the realm of classic Benthamite 19th century utilitarianism. We're in a realm of philosophy. So we have to recapture this sense of human agency. We have to recapture this sense of human volition. We have to rid ourselves of the ideas that these systems might in any way, shape or form be free of moral or ethical or political with a small p dimensions, and we have to rid ourselves very quickly and very firmly of the notion that the only way in which we can understand or conceptualize or build or design or operate these systems is by drawing exclusively on the discourses of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And as one of the very first steps in all of this, we do need to overhaul the education process around cyber and computer science and all the rest of it. We should stop allowing people to escape our clutches even undergraduate level unless and until we've taught them Wiener and Turing and Jack Good. The fact that we let people loose with this sobriquet cyber attached in any way, shape or form to anything they do, and they have absolutely no conceptualization that Uncle Norbert ever existed, let alone of the 3 books that he wrote, we're asking for trouble. Now there's a seat, and I'm probably getting close to overrunning time. Profound. So, you will probably have guessed that I am not by training a technologist. I am by training an historian. And Fukuyama was an idiot. The idea that history, I mean, what a cretin, as if we call it so, allegedly, in a fraternal way. We've grown up with this inherited, assumed idea from the late 19th century of stability and of permanence. And it's wrong. We've grown up with the idea of a technological determinism, a futurism, the idea of progress with a capital P, that the future will be like today, only better, the arc of progress that will drag people with it ineluctably forward in every sense, morally, technologically, materially, and so on and so forth. And we're kind of questioning that in a whole lot of other. And since the end of the Second World War, Europe, particularly us, the European heartlands, have stopped fighting each other on our own doorstep. Prior to, and up to and including the Second World War, we did an awful lot of that, which is kind of why we stopped in 1945, especially after we dropped a few atom bombs and took a look into that great chasm. I think we are probably, inevitably, heading for one of those really, 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 really rather dramatic periods in our history when an enormous amount is going to change. Just cast your mind back to the early stages of the Industrial Revolution in this part of the world, in these islands, 1750 to 1850-ish, roughly. The countries teetered on the brink of revolution not once, but many, 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 many times. There was an enormous amount of blood shed. We created entirely new social and civil institutions in order to cope with the changes that were taking place, the Metropolitan Police Force, the great reform of the parliamentary system, the modern form of democracy as we currently experience it. All kinds of expressions of this massive, literal revolution in the affairs of humans as we, for instance, uprooted vast swathes of the human population and transported them from the agrarian, quasi-feudal existence that they had into the urban industrialized existence with a massive amount of discontent and inequality and turbulence along the way. In the United States, of whatever big lump of male unskilled, whatever that percentage is of the overall population, it's a big one, of that lump of the male unskilled population, working population in the United States, something ridiculous like 40% of it drives an internal combustion engine vehicle for a living. It's gone. It's gone. The first things that we're likely to automate or to render autonomous or quasi-autonomous are going to be the big articulated lorries driving down the motorway, because it's a relatively constrained environment and you don't need level 5 autonomy to do that. And then the distribution in the town centres where the topography is relatively stable and you probably don't need level 5 automation to do that either. So that's most of them gone. Huge. So the implications for this are huge. If we take a little step further, just a tiny step further, and we look at some of the implications of the human augmentation stuff, Calico, Google Calico, that's going on, and we map that onto the existing distributions of wealth and power and privilege, the 1% are going to become effectively immortal. Or at least that's the way it's going to be seen. There were other hands, but I may have witted on too long. There was a gentleman at the back, I think. I think their relationship to work and their relationship to employment is going to be radically different to yours and mine. I think that there is already the nascent sense of a generational betrayal narrative, which is beginning to coalesce around Brexit, for instance. There was a clear generational divide in the voting patterns. It cut across traditional voting patterns, but certainly expressed the generational form. I think that they are, the net generation and the ones that come after them, are going to, in this sense, be the revolutionaries. They're going to deploy this stuff in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And just to make matters even more frightening or exciting, depending on your perspective, they have access to essentially, again, a nascent, but essentially an ideological construct that can guide them through. In other words, transhumanism. You want to get really, 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 really freaked about all of this? Go look at what the transhumanists are up to, particularly on the California coast, particularly around Silicon Valley, and then start to map the transhumanist ideas onto some of the stuff that you start to see coming out of Alphabet, for the sake of the argument, and start to map the transhumanist ideas onto some of the more interesting pronouncements of Elon Musk. Stunned silence. Thank you.